All right, so hello everyone. I am thrilled to be here today. So I'm going to be demoing for you a little holiday painting, and I have a couple of different series. And one of the things I do is a lot of sparkly lights, and light is kind of my muse, and it's in all of my work. But today I'm going to show you a technique that I do with these lights, and it's a nice, pretty holiday kind of painting. So we'll be doing that today. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat, because I think we're going to mute everyone. We're having some feedback issues. And Carol should see the chat and she can ask throughout the demo. I'm going to put my desk on. Okay. So I'm going to be demoing this little teacup today. And I have this about 8 by 10 is the size I'll be painting. And I did one.
I haven't gotten your, I can do your desk, but you can't, it turns out, because I'm the host.
Oh.
So here we go. There's your desk. Sorry.
Can everyone see that? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to show you, I'll talk a little bit about my supplies because it's a little bit different just so you can see it. And I did want to show you, I have kind of my step-by-step of a painting. So this is kind of where we are now, where you're in the beginning and you have the masking. I do quite a bit of masking. So this is like kind of a stage 1. Here is a stage 2. Put my camera up a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Here is kind of stage 2. I did this demo in England this summer. So here's stage 2. And then here's stage 3. So as you can see, that I paint one thing at a time, kind of, like my cellularly, a little bit of a time, finish a section, get my values established right away, move on to the next area. I've started peeling masking off in here. And then your final result, at the end, I have the entire thing painted. So this is a very important part of my process that I adapted, which was painting a section at a time. And I think it has been very integral in making sure that my paintings are successful, because I'm able to see if my values are working right away. When I'm working with students, sometimes people will have kind of this mid-tone painting where you're doing a little bit of everything, and you get to this stage that I call it the adolescent stage of a painting, where nothing is quite resolved and it's all in the middle of growing up, and you kind of abandon it because you don't know if it's working. So this painting the way I paint has worked for me to make sure that I know it's successful from the beginning and that it's working all the way through. And I'll be showing that today when I paint. The teacup's a little bit different because I'll be doing the teacup first, and then I'll move on to the background because of the way that I'm doing it. These are my pans. I make my own little pan paints. These are Daniel Smith watercolors. And so they're all in these little containers, and their containers are numbered and they're labeled on the back with a waterproof label and waterproof marker. And then I have corresponding swatch cards that show me all of the colors that are in these containers. So when I have a reference photo for painting, then I can go through and shop my reference photo. I can look at all my paint swatches, see which colors I want to use for my painting, and then pull those colors out. I organize them in these little palettes kind of by analogous colors. So I kind of have the oranges and yellows in one, blues in another, greens in another, pinks, purples, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I've kind of organized them. I like them in these little containers, which are they look like little pill containers. I actually got these in Japan at a hardware store, but it is like it's 7 days of, like pills if you're looking at those pill containers. The thing that you want, if you do decide you want to order, anything like this, they have them at Amazon. You want to make sure they hinge at the back, because if they hinge at the front, you have kind of a traffic jam of lids in the middle. And I use them a lot of times where I stack them up and have my thumb in the middle. And then when I'm traveling, I have a bungee cord kind of system. So when I'm traveling, then I can put them all on this cord. And when I'm pulling them out of a backpack, or if I'm at a workshop, they're all organized and kind of on this big necklace of paints. So this system has evolved and adapted for me as I was moving all the time, traveling, and wanted to take my paint with me everywhere I went. And same thing, I paint with pans. That's when I started painting with watercolors. When I first started painting in watercolors, I was living in Germany, and my art store only had pans. And so that's what I started with, and I just now only make my own and have them in here. I also don't use a palette anymore. The only thing I have a palette for, this is my black. I mix a custom black, and it's indigo and sepia. Daniel Smith, 50-50 of each, whatever I scored of one, I scored the equal amount of the other, and mix it up. And so I have this little tray that has my black in it. And so I have it in a big one like this so that I can get big brushes in there to do backgrounds if I'm doing a solid black background. But that's the only palette that I have. Otherwise, I mix on the page. And that became out of me becoming like a palette hoarder and having palettes all over the place. And I needed to streamline that process. So you know how it is. As we're artists, we kind of evolve with what's going on with us and what we need to make it work. So I'm going to start painting this little teacup today. And I'm going to start in the center with my teacup, and I'll be using some colors that are a little more opaque and some that you might not have in your traditional palette. And every color that I use are typically favorites of mine that I use in a lot of paintings. So especially when I'm teaching a class or something, I want to recommend paints that I know are tried and true, and I use a lot. So one of those colors we're going to start with today is my favorite yellow, and it's called Bismuth Vanadate Yellow. And that's a mouthful. I'm going to start with the Bismuth Vanadate in here. Now this yellow is crucial in this painting when I'm doing this kind of glowy lights. And it's an opaque yellow, and I call it a bully color because this color can come in and take over. And most yellows are transparent, or they kind of get overwhelmed by the other colors, but this one takes over. And even some of the other opaque colors don't take over as well as this one does. So I've got a lot of masking on here. I use masking more and more. It's a huge part of my process. Masking is kind of an art form. And the more I paint and the more detailed I get, and the more masking I use. And I'll show you in a second. I use a ruling pen to apply my masking fluid. That's become part of my process. I've never enjoyed using a brush. I've tried all different methods of getting masking on the paper, but the ruling pen worked the best, and I use that tool in my degree. I went to school for graphic design and interior design, and I used ruling pens in both of those. I used to use ruling pens for drafting, and they were used in graphic design back before you did everything per the computer. When I was going through school, even though they were doing mostly computer, they still wanted you to learn the old way. So I'm thankful that I learned how to use a ruling pen really well. And I'll show you what that is in just a second. So I'm coming in now and kind of placing where my yellows are. And some of this is I'm painting on top of masking fluid, but I'm giving kind of a glow around where the masking is. So it's kind of important. And I call this stage mapping in. And I come in and I map in shapes and colors starting with my lightest color first and then working to my darkest. And the mapping in process is kind of like the masking process. It's my next one. It helps orient me, figure out where I am, what I'm doing.
Wow.
I'm going to come down here. And like I said, I'm just getting some of my yellows in to start. Because this is the one object, essentially, that I'm painting, this teacup and saucer in the middle, I'm treating that as kind of one part of the painting. If I'm painting light bulbs, which I paint a whole series of light bulbs I do kind of paint a light bulb at a time. When I'm painting other things, I literally kind of go through the page an inch at a time from right to left This one, because of the background, is treated a little differently because I have a neat technique that I do in the background. And I'll be showing you. So that's why we're kind of focusing on the teacup first. And the masking fluid that I used in this one that has that blue tint to it so that you can see it is Holbein masking fluid. And I was just saying beforehand, it's got to be a thinner masking fluid. This is my ruling pen. And it has to be a thinner masking fluid that I'm able to use where it can, I kind of load it that way, it fills in the little reservoir in the middle. And then you're able to do very, very thin lines with it. You can do your dots, of course, thicker lines, squiggly lines. You can get very detailed with the ruling pen. Now, not all ruling pens are created equal. I don't know if you can see my thin lines up there, if I do it over here. But you can get very thin, detailed. You could even mask out your signature if you wanted to. So not all ruling pens are created equal. This one was made in Japan. Some of you may have ruling pens laying around if you have an old drafting set or you had someone in a family that had one. The ones that were made in Germany and Japan are engineered and made pretty well. This one's kind of cool. It opens so that you can clean it. And with masking fluid, it just peels off. But I do use this with paint as well. So I will load my ruling pen. I just got some of my black that I showed you in that tray, and I put it on this brush, and I have it kind of in a consistency like you would have in an ink bottle, and I'm loading the side of it. I kind of roll the paint in there, and then same thing with that. You're able to paint, and you close the wheel to get really tight. You can open it to get thicker, thinner lines. And so the closed off, you get it, the thinner the line you can get with the ruling pen with paint in it. And like I said, the one from Japan is hard to find, but there is a company called John Neal Books. I think it's JOHNNEAL, and they sell calligraphy tools. And under their calligraphy tools, they have the ruling pen. They're made in England, and those are pretty nice. Other than that, you can find one you can sometimes find them on like eBay or something like that, where you get like the old German sets. I wish they had the Japanese brand for sale. Sometimes they do. The brand is Uchida, UCHIDA. And so occasionally Amazon will have it. It'll be shipped over from Japan, so you pay about as much in shipping as you do for the tool, but it is worth it in my opinion. Okay, so I'm using that bismuth vanadate to get some of those yellows in there, and then we're going to move on to the next color. I paint fairly slowly. Teaching online classes has gotten me to the point where I can do like an 11 by 14 in 9 hours. And I still for a piece that I was going to enter in a show, I would still be tweaking afterwards, but I have been able to get to the point where I can get 11 by 14 done in about 9 hours. So, it's like everything when you're teaching or demoing, you're kind of painting at fast pace. When I'm at home, I watch paint dry a lot. When I'm not doing it for show. But I do try to take video or pictures when I'm painting. And I will tell you, having judged some big shows lately, including Women in Watercolor, that more and more you need to have these work in progress pictures, because this thing called AI is running around, and Women in Watercolor, there were a few paintings that there was a panel of us that were judging, and some of the judges were questioning whether the artwork was AI or their own work. And so the Lynn Pratt that organizes that is head of Women in Watercolor. She asked the artists to send pictures of work in progress or video if they didn't have it on their social media pages. So it's just a cautionary thing that I tell my students now. But the benefits of taking work in progress pictures are great. I've been doing it for a long time, so that you kind of get a second set of eyes looking at it. Sometimes I will share them on social media as they're in progress to kind of spur me along. I feel like I have accountability to get it finished a little faster. Okay, so I have most of my yellows in. We're going to move to our next color. I'm going to use quinacridone burnt orange. I'm using synthetic brushes. This is the size 4. The other one, this is also a size 4, but it's an Italian company. So you can see there can be discrepancies in the sizing of brushes. But I use size 4 round for the most part. I would say that other one's more like a size 2. But for details, I use that. So this is quinacridone burnt orange. Quinacridones are beautiful colors. I would say Quin Gold is in just about every painting I have. Quinacridone burnt orange is close behind that. It's in a lot of my paintings. So I'm kind of creating tiny little wet on wet sections. So right now I put that bismuth vanadate down. It's pretty much dry as I was working down the cup, which I wanted it to be. Now I'm coming behind with this Quin burnt orange, and you'll see kind of my cellular painting process coming in. So I've got that going. I'm stopping in a natural. This is the water line in the teacup, and all this masking gives me like an indication of where I am and what I'm painting. And so I'm stopping in that area to get this up to speed. I'm going to add a little pyro red in here, and I may even add a little Quin burnt orange. So I'm getting some fiery colors, adding a little Quin burnt orange in there in this wet on wet. And then I'm going to come in with a little of my indigo sepia. And I'm going to drop it in. So when I have a wet on wet, I come in with a little creamier consistency for my darkest dark, because your paint's going to travel a lot. So the more water you add to it, the more it travels. And so if I want it to travel a little less and control my wet on wet, then I bring in a little more creamy consistency to the paints that I apply on top. Okay, so I'm starting to get my values established right away. Now, Quin burnt orange in there. And I'm just kind of helping it move around a little. Okay, I'm going to come over into the center section, and I'm going to show you why this bismuth vanadate is a neat color. So I'm going to start the same way I did that last section, Quin burnt orange. So to make sure things are consistent and I don't have a schizophrenic painting, someone asked me that. They said, if I painted a section at a time, this part of the painting would not look like the other part as I moved on. So I use the same kind of steps and colors throughout the process to keep it consistent. So I'm creating that wet on wet again with the Quin burnt orange. And then my next step, I added some of that pyro red. And gold. That in the middle. And then I'm gonna come in with my darkest dark indigo sepia, a little creamier. And that's how I make a color that is a super staining dark color, not take over, because I'm coming with that creamier bit. It could really just overwhelm everything else. Dark up here. I've got this masking that's going to help with these sparkles. Okay, and I'm going to show you this bismuth vanadate and why it's a neat color. I'm going to get a little bit smaller brush so I have control. And I'm going to get this bismuth vanadate and I'm going to show you right here. I'm going to add in, get rid of a little bit of it because I don't want it to take over too much. I'm going to add in right there around that light. So this is a masked out light. Do you see how that just started to feather out? I'm gonna scoot this down a little bit so you can see. So that yellow that I just added in, it just kind of did a fire, like a fire burst right into those colors. And normally a yellow wouldn't do that because of the opaque nature of that one and that color and the pigment that is used. That is why that is working. So we're going to come over here. These masked lines, in addition to helping create the sparkle, they also help me have sections that I can create these little wet on wets that I'm doing right now. I'm gonna use this whole section over here. I'm gonna kind of treat as one. Same steps. And burnt orange, creating a wet on wet. But these masked areas help me so that I don't get this whole wet on wet from over there traveling in to this section. So when I'm setting up a still life, and I'm going to show you in a second how I can show you a little bit of how I set up my still lives, whether it's daylight or nighttime. But when I'm setting them up, I'm thinking about how I can have natural stopping places. I'm going to get a little of the pyro red. We're doing the exact same steps. Dropping some of that in, and then I'm going to drop in a little plain gold kind of in this area. And we're going to come back in with the creamier dark. And that's mostly, let's see how, I'm really looking at my reference photo. I do all my own photography for my reference photos. The photography part and the concept and all of that is a huge part of my process, and I enjoy this part sometimes as much as the painting part, the setting up the concept. I kind of like to challenge myself with different ideas, kind of like these lights, you know, this all came about like what could I do with all these little fairy lights, and how, you know, how could I have these dramatic little kind of firefly. And that all came about. Mike was asking me about, you know, like living in different areas, if that has, when I have too much of a glow, like I just had too much of an explosion, I'm coming back with a thirsty brush. That's a wet brush that's clean. And it has most of the water out of it, and I can just control it a little bit. I can drop in a little bit more now, and I just kind of back and forth and control. And if it gets too crazy out of control again, I do the same thing. I just kind of suck a little bit back up, suck a little water back up, and control the fire burst. But these fiery lights and teacups and all this all came about from living in Tokyo for almost 9 years. The colors of Japan, the tea, the even I'm a still life painter. How can I translate what I see in Japan into a still life. And that's how some of these setups came about. I was trying to create kind of what the feeling of Tokyo is, where it's complete sensory overload. There are just signs and lights everywhere. There's a lot of noise. When you go into a store, there's a computer screen. Some stores, not all stores, but there's a computer screen for every product that they have. So they're all doing like an infomercial at the same time. The pachinko places, which are kind of their gambling, they're all like, so they're so loud. So there's like this chaos and loudness, but also this beauty. And so I started doing these still lifes with just a ton of glass and lights. And it kind of represented this Tokyo skyline with the lights and everything, and just this cacophony of senses going on. And that was kind of my interpretation of Tokyo in a still life. And then it's evolved, a demo where I just do one teacup versus an entire setting of dishes. And orange was not like a favorite color of mine before living in Japan, and orange is everywhere. There's, some different color combinations too that you don't see different areas when you're traveling. It was interesting. I'm an ambassador for Daniel Smith Paints, and one of the other ambassadors, she lives in Australia, and we meet. In fact, they're meeting right now online, and we meet twice a week online. And she was talking about we just had a big exhibit in Dallas from the Fabriano exhibit, which is an exhibit that's in Italy, and she was saying, all of the Australian artists have the same kind of palette, it's like influenced by what they live around and the nature around them. And I thought it was really interesting. It's true. Same thing with when you see the whole group of the artists that were hanging from India, and it was similar color palettes. And it's just really interesting to see how people are influenced by the colors that surround them. And I think that's true too. The United States is a big place. The aesthetic that you're seeing in the Southwest is totally different than the aesthetic you're seeing in the Northeast. And I tend in the wintertime, when it starts to get cold, to paint these colors, these warm colors. And in the summertime, I start painting the cooler colors. So it's kind of funny how environmental things can change. All right, so I have the same colors in here. It's a little lighter, so I'm going to get some of my Pyro Orange. And I have a lot of masking in there. We have the yellow on top. Right now, it doesn't look super impressive until you get some of the masking off, but there's a means behind the method. Pyro Orange is a great orange. I love to glaze the Pyro Orange with Pyro Red, Pyro Orange, and Opera Pink, glazing those all together create gorgeous reds. Okay, we're going to come down in this area, and I'm going to switch up and start with my Pyro Red. The tea in this teacup area is a little more red. And so instead of doing the burnt orange, which would create a little bit of a neutral, now I have this yellow water line where the tea is. And I have learned when I'm setting up a still life and I'm painting tea, actual tea can get a little murky depending on the tea. So I use food coloring to create my tea colors. And it's fun to, painting glass with liquid in it versus painting just glass, it's really fun because the liquid distorts. And you have all these little abstract paintings that happen. This is my Pyro Red. That's kind of what the reason I got hooked painting glass and sparkly things and light, as I loved the first time I ever painted a still life that had glass in it. I fell in love with the abstracts. There were so many little abstract paintings, like each one of these little sections is kind of like a little abstract painting that we've just done. And when you put them all together like a puzzle piece, you end up with this realistic painting. And I just kind of fell in love with the process and the results. I'm getting some of my Pyro Orange. And I was hooked. And I started initially, when I first started painting, I had, like I said, gotten a degree in interior design, and I had graphic design background. I had gone to school for graphic design for a while. And I had never really painted in watercolor throughout that, although I kick myself because in interior design, I did all my renderings with colored pencils, and watercolor would have been easier on my hands for all those renderings, but I could have combined at least. But anyway, when our first assignment, I met my husband in college, and he was in the architecture program. And our first assignment, well, we got married right out of college, and he was commissioning into the Air Force. And so his first assignment was Germany. And so we got married finals week of college so that I could be on his orders to go to Germany. And that's when I first picked up watercolor. I was trying to get an interior design job, and that wasn't working out with language barrier and a bunch of other things. So they needed painting teachers at the art school. It was like an adult continuing education kind of thing, and they needed painting teachers. And so I thought, well, he already had oil painters and he needed something else. So I went to the library and got books on watercolor and went home and taught myself how to paint in watercolor. I did a couple paintings, took them back in, and he said, okay, you can teach watercolor. And the book I picked up, and it was kind of interesting because John Salmon and I just saw a demo with him in Dallas, and he was saying that there's not very many watercolor books that are like soup to nuts on watercolor. You know, a lot of them are specialized, like how do you create, landscapes or this or that. And the book I picked up was Reader's Digest Guide to Watercolor. And it really was soup to nuts watercolor techniques. And he recommended, I just got it, I have to look over there the name of it. He recommended another book that's similar. And I just ordered it after he recommended it, and I just got it in. So I haven't even really looked at it yet. But so I hadn't thought about the fact that there's not that many books that are comprehensive. And so that's what I picked up. But I didn't paint for myself at that time. I strictly painted to teach classes. I taught kids classes. I did homeschool groups. I did adult classes. And then when we left there, I went to work in a variety of different creative things and painted murals for a while, did faux finishes. My mom opened a frame shop. So it wasn't until my husband, after I had children and my husband deployed to a dangerous location when he was his second big deployment since we were married, but the first one when we had kids and he went to Afghanistan. The first one he went to Iraq. And when he was in Afghanistan, and it was very dangerous, and I was nervous and hanging out with a baby and a toddler at home and didn't have a lot of adult conversations, I thought I have got to have an outlet. And I thought I used to paint, and so I got my watercolors back out and started painting. when my kids were little. And I followed a podcast at the time. It's no longer there, but and she was a marketing expert that was becoming an artist, and I just did everything she said. And she suggested that people do a calendar because it was a holiday kind of time, or gearing up for that. I think it was September actually, but this is quinacridone burnt orange. She was talking about, trying to gear up for the holidays and what could you do with your art for the holidays. And she suggested putting a calendar together. You could sell it or give it out as gifts. And the thing that was neat about it is it made you think about doing 12 paintings that related to each other that could all be in a calendar together, and what would that be. And so I really didn't know what students are always trying to figure out things. When you first start painting, I should say, people are trying to figure out what their style is, what they want to paint, what they like. And so I didn't know that either. And so that's my very first time I put a still life together, because it made sense to me that I was drawn to kind of still life and I could set that up. So I thought about what the month of September, what would that mean, like in a still life for me. And so I literally took the curtains down off my windows in my kitchen and set up a bowl of apples in a candlewick bowl, which is my husband inherited them from his grandmother, and called them marble dishes when he was a little kid, because they've got looks like clear marbles all around the edge of the glass. And so I painted a bowl of apples in candlewick with my curtains, which had a stripe pattern. And that was my first ever still life.
I have a question from Jean, wondering
Mm-hmm.
when you were in Japan, if you ever did go to a Japanese tea ceremony and paint the
Mm-hmm.
green tea.
I've been to several Japanese tea ceremonies. In fact, one of my Japanese friends, that's her job. She does tea ceremonies. And so I have been to a lot of tea ceremonies. I have not painted green tea yet. Is that what she asked? Green tea?
Yeah, that's it. She wanted to know if you'd ever tried painting green tea.
I have not yet. It is on my list, for sure. In fact, I have it as an idea for the green tea. That's one of those, making matcha look good in glass. It's kind of like a green drink or something. It's a little murky. So I just haven't tackled that yet. But yes, it's absolutely on my list to paint that. And I have certainly painted a lot of kimonos and obis and teacups and all that. I just haven't tackled green tea yet. And I painted the iron teapots and glass teapots. I'm coming in here on the handle. This is pretty much pretty contrasted, a lot of sparkle and a lot of dark. So I'm coming straight in with my darkest dark, and I'm utilizing my masking that I have down there.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you use a ruling pen, Carrie.
Are you?
I haven't seen a ruling pen since architecture school, way back.
Uh-huh. I know, you gotta dig them out. Yeah,
Isn't that in a closet someplace, Carol?
No, I think I got rid of them.
Yeah, in fact, my when I actually was introduced when I was in graphic design school, and we had our teacher wanted us to do everything old school first before we went to the computer. So he was teaching us the ruling pen, because they used them in the ads. And we had one entire semester where we just had to do lines with a ruling pen. Now you did different designs with it, but it was black and white designs with a ruling pen. And the whole intention was to have you master having it completely weighted evenly from one end to the other.
Well, I think it's really good, but it never occurred to me.
Who knew that would be something for the rest of my life? You never know what is going to be the thing that you pick up on. It's kind of like I always say to people that take my workshops, if you pick one thing up that you use from then on, that was worth your time. And sometimes that comes from someone in the class, and that happened to me the first workshop I ever took. A woman taught me how to make my own graphite paper. And so I use my own graphite paper for transferring drawings to my watercolor paper. And so you just never know. And, like making these little pans, that all evolved from a woman that took a workshop of mine, and she was putting her pans, and her husband had a lot of prescription bottles. And they had a lot of prescription bottles with the caps around. And so she was taking the caps off of his prescription bottles and putting different paints in there, and had all these little, discs of paint all over, and they were labeled on the bottom. And so I was like, oh, I like that. And so I went home and I bought like the little round containers. They have bead containers. You can have Walmart and Michael's. And so I had those at first, and I had all my paints in those. And I liked that, but then I had all these little containers everywhere. So then it evolved into having them 7 in one container.
You're absolutely right about no matter what workshop you take, you learn something. Bring some of them aren't as full of new information as others.
Well, like I said, sometimes it's like silly little things, like someone using the cap of a prescription, like that really changed how I painted, and changed how I can use my paints. And so you just never know where the big ideas that affect you come from. And that's why, I enjoy Zoom classes, and I enjoy in person, and each one has their own benefit. In fact, when I teach my in-person workshops, I kind of do a hybrid of both, where everyone has a personal screen, but then you could also do your in-person stuff. But there is a lot to be said for the camaraderie of having artists get together.
Yeah.
Even if when you're traveling, I have a group that we exhibit and paint together, and we had the first time we all met online and became a little painting group, mentoring group, and we started exhibiting. And the first time we all met in person was in Italy. It's 5 of us, and that's kind of a risk, right? But traveling with artists like that, it's so fun, because I enjoy traveling with my husband and my kids, but it's a whole different kind of vacation, When you're with other artists, it's like you look at the world a little differently. I just traveled with one of my friends. We went to Italy last year, and she paints a lot of birds. And I honestly probably wouldn't have, I knew, she paints a lot of different things, but I never realized how much she loved painting birds until I was traveling with her. And then, I'm looking for certain scenes, and she's looking for birds. And, like now when I see a bird or something, I'm like, oh, she would like that. Kind of opens your eyes to what people look for. My other friend, she sketches all of the people in the airport. She paints portraits, and she's always looking for people in the airports, and like out traveling. So it's neat to see what interests everybody. Okay, so I'm using Quin Gold. I had some of my indigo sepia, and now I have some of my Quin burnt orange. And I'm going to come in here with a little Quin Gold. So we're doing a little section at a time. And now I want to add a little pop of brightness in there. So I'm going to use my Bismuth Vanadate. And just pop a little, get that little fireball like looking Quin orange or Quin Gold. And the masking, that's like I said, it's kind of its own art form. Masking, it's a blessing and a curse to use masking. because it leaves those hard edges when you take it off and you have to kind of learn. But the more I use it, the more I use it in stages a lot too. I might put a wash down, let it dry completely, and then mask out, different colors. So I use it more and more and more.
Do you add water to it to keep so that you can use the ruling pen, or does it come?
I just find a thin masking. You can add water. Now some people say ammonia too. You can add a little bit. I've talked to the owner of Daniel Smith. He has, they have masking too, and I have used theirs in the past. I asked him about adding water to your masking to thin it out, and he said you only should do 10%. So like the entire bottle, you should only change the property by 10% before you can run into issues where it's sticking to your paper or not doing what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
So my suggestion is that you pour it in a separate container, because the more you allow oxygen, air to get into the bottle, it gets thick. And of course now it's going to have it, but it dries. It has like a little layer that dries around the top, and you kind of have to peel it off sometimes or peel it out. And so the more you leave that open, the more the air gets in there and it's drying it out and thickening it up. So it's better if you can pour it in a smaller container. Do I practice what I preach? No. But I use so much masking fluid that it's not usually an issue.
Jean would like to know, and this is a good question, how long should the painting dry before you take the mask off?
Completely dry. So I do a temperature check. If you take I use the back of my little finger, the back of your hand, because it has less oil. But when you feel your paper, that's completely nothing's done to it. It's, right up here, and you feel the temperature. And then I come over here and I feel the temperature here. It's still cool to the touch. So I know that's not dry. When this temperature matches this temperature, you know that it's dry.
Okay.
You can use a hair dryer or something like that. I don't typically do that. I just sit around and let paint dry. But you can, some people even use heat guns with masking, but heat and masking are not best friends, and you run the risk of damaging your paper. And I should mention, I paint on Arch's 156-pound paper, which is thicker than 140, but not as thick as 300-pound. So you kind of have to know how your paper handles masking. And I always tell people, like, make sure if you haven't been using your masking on the regular, do a little test swatch on a little scrap sheet of paper of the same kind of paper you're using, and make sure that your masking fluid hasn't started. Sometimes it will leave like an oily residue where it like stains the paper and leaves a little bit of a yellow color, little, like, it's like oil, like if you were to you get oil on a shirt and it leaves that little oily residue. So you want to check your masking fluid. Even if you buy a new bottle at the store, you have no idea how long that masking's been sitting on a shelf. So just do a check before you do a whole painting. I mean, there's nothing worse than doing a whole painting and then you've got some bum masking that won't come off. And I've only had issues with masking not coming off. One time when I stuck my painting in a car and it was hot, and then I took it out to paint somewhere, and then the masking kind of adhered to the paper, and I had a hard time getting it off. My friend that had a studio in Florida, she only air conditioned it when she was in there working, and she would have trouble with the masking sticking. So it all depends on your environment. Should not be in hot places, and it shouldn't be left on. And the other thing that I suggest, we all have good intentions that we're going to finish a painting right away, but sometimes life gets in the way. So I will mask a section at a time, and what I think I can get done in that day, and then I'll put masking on the next section before I work on it, so that it's not sitting there for months on that painting. And like right now I have a student and we're painting, we're online and we're painting a little bit each week. And so I just mask what we're gonna get done in that week. Okay, we're getting close to done with the teapot, and then we'll do the fun stuff in the background. It's
Uh,
kind of the same.
Yeah, with the fun stuff in the background that's in your photograph. Is that actual? Or did you add that with Photoshop or
No, that's actual. That's my photo.
how do you, what is that? All those,
Those are little, like, they're little fairy lights. They're the micro lights.
uh-huh.
And that's what that is. I have a little presentation. Let me get a little of this done. Actually, what we'll do is we'll work on some of this, and while I'm letting it dry for a minute, I'll do that presentation
Okay.
and show you. I'm going to show you how I set up daytime still life versus nighttime still life, like this, where I have light, all these lights. I'm going to show you both in that.
Cool.
And I do all my own photography. And like I said, I enjoy that process. I honestly feel like when artists are completely opposed to using a photograph, a lot of times the people that say that, they'll self-admit that they're not the greatest photographers. And so they have better results, painting from life or whatever. For me, the way I paint, I'm trying to take like utilitarian objects, things we use all the time, see all the time, and I'm painting them like in a more beautiful fashion. I'm kind of giving them their day. Like whether it's a light bulb or a teacup or teapots, these objects, they're like beautiful, but we never really take the time to look at them. So I'm setting them up and I'm kind of showing them in a better than life example, so this is part of my process. The photography, the setting it up, all of this is part of my process. And so I would not achieve the same results that I want painting from life. I mean, I could now, that I've done it so many times in photography, but I want to, that's just part of what I'm trying to do, is make these beautiful, kind of whimsical, have people kind of say, well, how did, like you just said, how did you do that? How did, how is that happening? Those are the kind of reactions I'm looking for, making it better than it is. Okay, so I'm dropping in this Quin Gold, Quin Burnt Orange. Like I said, all this little masking is creating these little wet on wet areas. In my light bulb series, if you haven't seen very much of my work, you can check, I have, my website is Carrie Waller Fine Art. You can look and see, I have 4 kind of main series. I have my light bulb series. I have my tea series. I have bottles and jars. And then I have like a travel series. And sometimes those things all overlap with each other, but those are the kind of the 4 main series that I have going on. And so you can check out and see my work on my website, Carrie Weller Fine Art, but I started painting the light bulbs based on it was around the time we were about to move to Japan. So that was around 2014 when we moved to Japan, and they said there was going to be a ban on incandescent light bulbs in the United States. And so it made me really think about these light bulbs that, like, since light bulbs had been invented, this is what, people were using, and how our light was going to change and what that was going to mean and how the looks of light bulbs, like all of it. And it just hit me that, like, oh my goodness, this is something that we're not going to see as much anymore. So I literally, my in-laws were in town at the time and they thought I was completely nuts, but it really just struck me. And I literally went around the house and pulled light bulbs out of light fixtures and took them outside and put them together and photographed, like these light bulbs. And I called the first one I painted Band.
Mm-hmm.
And they since have banned higher wattages. They still have, I think, 40, but it has changed our light. And so anyway, and it's changed the looks of light bulbs. It's hard to find very many incandescent bulbs anymore. And so that's how that series came about. And same thing with that one, you know, I just wanted, light bulbs are fascinating when you look at them and really kind of like dissect them, get into them. And I've had people say, "Oh, like, who would buy light bulb paintings?" Well, a lot of people buy light bulb paintings. I've had everything from people that are light bulb manufacturers to people that work at electric companies to just people that like them. If they're neat and you're passionate about it, you find an audience for it. And I've had, you know, you can't do anything without criticism. I've had people, had someone, I shouldn't say people, I had one person write to me and said it was irresponsible of me to paint incandescent light bulbs. They were bad for the environment.
Dear, I'm sorry. Don't laugh.
No, it's true. I was like, God, you can't do anything. So I just wrote back and said, these are out of commission, so it's okay.
Well, I think they're beautiful.
Well, thank you. They're fun to paint, you know, and I enjoy it really. Once you start painting them and you kind of get into it, it becomes less and less, you know, as artists, it's less and less about what it is. It's more about like colors, relationships, and you know how we're putting them all together. So it doesn't really matter what I'm painting. I'm getting lost in these shapes and the relationships and the colors. And in fact, the more I get lost, the better it's going to look, because I don't associate it with a teacup anymore. I just start really trying to paint what I'm seeing in these shapes and relationships. So whether it's a light bulb or a teacup or whatever, but the more you paint something too, you become so familiar with it. You know, I've painted so many light bulbs, I think I could paint them in my sleep now. And you get better at it. So that it's a true testimony to, you know, painting a series. And, you know, some people that like plein air painters, you know, they're basically painting the same kind of subject, you know, they become like formulaic about it almost, you know, as, and then same thing, I'm sure with portrait artists, you kind of get a groove going. And so I suggest you paint in a series or similar subject matter. It doesn't have to be. And when I'm photographing a subject, you know, like a setup of light bulbs, I will take hundreds of photos sometimes of that same setup, because you have bird's eye view, you know, all different angles, views, light. I twist it around when I do all my daylight ones outside. I photograph them in the sun. I haven't been able to replicate the sun with lights. And so I photograph them outside, and I just want to get as much as I can out of each photo shoot. And I have gone back to photo shoots that I did 10 years ago, and I paint something from that series 10 years later, because something that might not have struck you at that point might strike you now. Or maybe you've learned, you know, like I've learned more about photo editing, Photoshop and things since then. So I'm able to manipulate a little bit more, so I can use some things that maybe weren't great photos then, but I can turn them into them now. So I highly suggest series and lots of photos of that series if you're into painting from photos.
I think that your suggestion to fight AI is of doing things in photos in progress too is a really good suggestion.
Well, I mean, it's possible. I don't know. Maybe you can probably create a work in progress from AI, but you know, whatever documentation you have to show that you're the artist and you did it, you know, just protect yourself. It's going to become more of an issue before it's not an issue. So just the more stuff you have that just shows that you are you are intellectually, you own that property. And
yeah, very good suggestion. The other thing I'm thinking as you talk about in your process and how long it takes and how thoughtful you are, I think about John Salmon and how long his quite repetitive landscapes and cityscapes must, in all the work that he goes to for masking and
right. Yes.
Just the patience that you personify is difficult to imagine without watching you.
Well, it depends on, for me, painting and doing all these things is kind of a meditative process. And so if I have the best day ever is I am painting late at night with a movie on or a podcast or something, because I can't do music when I paint, because I need my brain to kind of go into autopilot. So I've got to be thinking about something else and just not thinking about my painting. And it's kind of becomes this meditative process, and you just kind of get lost in it. And so it doesn't become work then. But I know, like, one of my friends, she would rather pull her fingernails out than spend 45 hours painting a painting. She wants to be done in an hour.
Mhm.
And so everybody's got their own process and everything, which is great because we're all unique.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out what works. But I don't like it when people tell you, like, when I started painting, and I try to say this now, especially when I have people that are newer to watercolor, people would say, oh, well, you're not going to paint like that. When you get better, you'll loosen up and all this. And I thought, why put somebody down? I happen to be uptight and like to paint this way. And so don't put me down for my style.
You're giving me such good things to think about.
Well, it's such a sweeping statement, I mean, somebody just yesterday online, it was on one of the watercolor forum things, and the guy said, well, nobody should be painting anything except plein air and watercolor. Why would they paint anything else? It's like a disservice to watercolor. And I thought, that's a crazy statement. And it's there's room for all of us. There's room for all styles. So there's no reason to put down somebody else in the process. And I happen to I'm drawn, figuring out my style in the beginning. I had some great advice. It was actually that podcast I mentioned earlier. One of the co-hosts said, go and pick out art magazines, or go to an art museum, or even go on Pinterest, or online. What are you drawn to when you look at art? Who's your favorite artist? What do you like to look at? And you start to figure out what your style is based on what you enjoy looking at the most, or enjoy the most. And it could be, like, you really enjoy certain colors, so you want to incorporate those in your paintings. And I happen to be drawn to still life. And I will say, so I decided when I started painting, I wanted to have more of a contemporary spin on still life. That was one thing that was kind of I wanted to do. And so I did, because my background's interior design, I created a client in my head, and that I should say I have a house in my mind. And to decide whether my painting is getting too traditional, I'd have to say, would it go in the house of this client that I have, this, imaginary client? And so that helps me, because sometimes with still life, it can get a little too traditional, or I get off on the wrong track a little bit, when my thing is I really would like to have more contemporary. And so I do think about that. Now, since I've lived in other places now, I have vacation homes in my mind. So there might be one that has a little more Japanese influence, or whatever. You can have multiple spaces and have a series that go in there, but to keep myself on track and for the kind of direction I wanted to be, I do think about these spaces, and would this go in that space? Okay, this may be too dry, but I'm gonna get a little darker in here. So we're just about almost done with this.
When you're just doing a series and stuff, what size do you do things like full sheet or?
I love painting big. And I that group I was talking about, the artists, there's 5 of us. Now we have 3. We had we've had a death and some illness in our group, but that group, we exhibit a lot together, and so I paint for those exhibits, and so I love to paint full size or bigger, and but it's getting so expensive to ship full size or bigger.
Oh, yeah.
So recently I still say you get the most impact with that big size, right? I mean, like, especially if you're trying to enter a show, like a big show, it's like an AWS or something like that, and it's going to be judged in person. I still suggest spending the money and doing a bigger size because it's just impactful. If it's going to be judged in person and you have the bigger size, it's hard to not recognize. Now, I've seen some charming smaller paintings, and I'm not saying that, like, recently I was just at the National Watercolor Society reception, and there were multiple very small paintings that won, won awards. So I can't, this is not a all the time, but in general, for the, most part, like having that big impact is hard to deny. So I do like to paint the larger ones, but with shipping costs and everything, and having participated in some international shows, quite a few lately in the last few years, they ask for half sheet, 15 by 22. So I've been kind of doing some 15 by 22 sizes. And like I was saying, when I do workshops or demos at 11 by 14, 15 by 22, that's fairly doable in a couple of days if I'm teaching it in person. So that's not a bad size for me right now. Still manageable for shipping.
You go to the 300-pound on the full sheet, or you stay with a 156?
No, in fact, the 156 comes oversized. So it's 40 by 30.
So that's the elephant size.
Well, that's what the 156 is also.
Okay.
And so that's what every one of my sheets is. Now I only have a handful left of my I won an art contest a long time ago, and I won $10,000 in art supplies, and so I'm still living off my paper from that, and I've got about 30 sheets left, so I'm a little bit in panic mode about what I do after I run out of that paper. Because Arches has been sold a couple of times, and the paper can be hit or miss now. Okay, so I'm going to come in and work on this background now.
Hey, while you're doing that, Deb Meyer says, when you paint larger pieces, you use larger brushes.
Can you repeat that, my volume?
Okay, when you paint larger pieces, do you use larger brushes?
No. I always use a size 4. Now, if it's a big background, so if I was doing this background solid black, I'm not going to be ridiculous and you do a tiny little brush for the whole thing. I would use a little bit bigger brush, but for the most part, most of my details are still pretty small, and so I use a size 4 or 8. But I'm kind of like, get used to my favorite brush, and I don't like to switch a lot. So this is my Quinn burnt orange. Like here, I'll show you. I'll get my size 8, which is about as big as I'll get. I'm gonna get my Quinn burnt orange to do this little section. It's in the background. So we're gonna do the same kind of technique we did with inside the cup. I'm gonna do a little bigger piece. I'll do inside the handle. Now, if I were doing this on a time constraint, I might slow it down a little bit. And I would paint this. So I'm doing this 8 by 10 because of the amount of time I have today. I would do this larger if I could, 15 by 22, even bigger if you wanted to. It's impactful. And, it's easier when you paint larger to get all the little details in. I will say that I have to debunk that myth sometimes. People want to paint small sometimes, and it's really easier when you're trying to get really tiny details and a lot of detail work. In fact, it translates better. Here's Quin Magenta. My friend paints miniatures, and they don't translate well when you photograph them. She paints them masterfully. She wins awards all the time. But when you go and photograph a miniature, and then so if she's painting 2x3, let's say, and she blows that up to like a 8x10 or 5x7, it doesn't look as good. So if we're painting full sheet or bigger, and we take a picture and they size it down to 8x10, it looks better. So when you, like, if you're trying to do for magazines or even social media or whatever, it looks better if you paint bigger and scale it down. Okay, so I have my burnt orange, and then I'm coming with my Quin Magenta, and now I'm going to come in with my Quin Magenta in here. And now I'm going to come in with my Indigo Sepia. And then I'm going to show you my and I'm kind of painting around. I left a little room for that. There's a little area back here. I don't want to completely cover all of this, so I'm kind of hit and miss while it's wet, dropping in the darks and leaving some areas that are not quite as dark and letting them kind of mingle. Now, the key to this, you have to put a lot of color. You don't want to come back. You do not want to have to be doing multiple washes, because we're going to come and do this effect and it won't work if we're having to come back in and get the color right. So I want this as concentrated as I can get it first pass. I don't want to come back in and do this multiple times. So I'm coming in with a lot of pigment here. So I'm going to soak up a little. Soak up a little of the liquid. And then I'm going to come in now with my bismuth vanadate. And I'm going to come around and do that starburst effect for the lights. And I'm going to soak up a little bit. If it gets, there's too much, if it gets spreads out too much, you come in and soak a little bit of that up. And then you can come back in and add a little more. I come right at the edge of the masking and add that yellow. I did this with a smaller brush, so I'm getting less water. You don't want a lot of water. And I'm going to come and do some of the chords as it's drying. I'm kind of monitor. Right now I'm doing right around where the lights are. And I had masked out the bright white dots of light. And like I said, I'm going to kind of keep feeding this. I'm going to drop in yellow right where the masking meets the paper. And then I'm going to come back in and soak up a little of it. And you kind of just keep watching it. And if you want more yellow, now when we take this masking off, we have bright white dots of light right there. So I'm making sure that that bright yellow comes right at the edge, because you want that kind of transition. And kind of like back and forth. Situation. Okay, so I'm going to move on and work this bottom part, but you see it works pretty fast when you get down into this area.
Mike wants to know if, did you take watercolor classes in other countries?
I took sumi or calligraphy in Japan. So that's kind of neat because you learn, those brush strokes. But I haven't taken, when I was in Germany, I didn't take any classes. Like I said, I was just teaching them then. And I really shouldn't have been, probably.
And Anne wants to know if, or says, comments, your paints appear quite dry in the containers, yet look very juicy when you apply them. How are you accomplishing that?
I just add water with my brush, so I'm not spraying them or anything like that, and they are dry. It's totally what you get used to. I am not used to, in fact, it annoys me if I have to put fresh paint in here and it's not dry when I go to paint, it's like another thing I have to remember. Because I've gotten used to the consistency of the paint that I paint with. So it's all what you get used to painting with. And so I know how much water I'm adding, and that just comes with lots of miles on the brush and paint, like getting used to your own paint and how you do it. Some people paint with fresh paint, and I don't want to do that because I'm just not used to it. All right, so I got my, and then when you switch brushes too, you have to think about the fact you're adding more water in, when you get a bigger brush or a natural hair brush. I've gone pretty much mostly synthetic, because like I said, when I find a brush I like, and then I know how much water's in it and all, it's learning all your tools. And so once I've got it all down, I don't want to have to think about switching. But I will at some point because these brushes are all from Japan and I can't get them here. So I have been ordering brushes from different places to see if I can find ones that I like as well, but I haven't yet. And then I found a brush I really like, but it's made by an Italian company that I can't get here either. So. So I either have to wait and just buy it when I'm in Italy, or actually I have some Italian friends. I could probably get them to send them to me. Okay, so I'm gonna drop in the dark. So you start to get the gist of this. I'm leaving some areas a little lighter. And this has got like kind of a, so it's really kind of fun, like this process, and with these little fairy lights, it's really fun. And I do this technique a lot. This has become one of my techniques, that I do a lot now. And so I'll set up, I just did a Christmas painting that we did colored lights with and little glass trees. And I did a workshop with that. That was fun. If you don't get enough spread, you can add. And this has kind of a glow on the table from something. Let me come around quickly. I'm not doing too bad on time. So I'm going to come around and finish this area up here. And while it's drying, I'm going to show you a little slideshow on my setting them up. And then the last step after it all dries is just showing how I clean up my masking. And I can show that on the teacup already because it's dry. I have a couple of cats now, and they like to help me set up my still life. And so recently I was setting one up on I have a black cat and they're hard. I don't know if you've ever had a black animal, but they're hard sometimes to get neat pictures of or paint because they're hard to photograph. And she was sitting in the lights. And so I took her picture in all the little fairy lights. And so I painted her. In these lights. I think that's the first time I painted a cat since like 8th grade. I think I have a picture of her in my still life setup thing. You can see these are fun. I painted this. I did a ball jar with these lights in it. That reminded me of fireflies and when I was a kid, catching fireflies in a jar. And so I've painted them that way. I've painted, like I said, I've painted these with the glass dishes and everything, and that's you can be really elaborate with that or simple like this with one cup. But this is just a really fun technique, the glass Christmas trees with the colored lights. How far I can get before I am. Do the same thing. I'm gonna go on with my Quin Magenta. And I'm looking at my reference to see where I have the darkest areas and where more of the light. And it's sitting on a table and there's kind of some brightness on the table reflections. And I'll leave a little bit of that. And it was kind of fun when I did the holiday lights with the multicolor lights. It was fun. I had to go find all my I had to go find all of my opaque colors and so that I could do the same technique with that. And I will say it's kind of fun. Daniel Smith has a really nice interactive website and you can go in and search for just that, opaque colors, warm colors, all the reds, cool reds, warm reds. You can see them. Each brand ambassador has a oops, I didn't do my darks. Each brand ambassador has a palette, their favorite 18 colors. And they have those online too. When you're in person or see somebody, you can get them in person, but you can see those colors. So check out their site if you are interested. It's kind of neat, if you need to know, let's say coming up soon, if anybody's going to paint for Transparent Watercolor Society, you would want to know all the transparent colors. So that you only incorporate transparent colors in your painting. And so you can search that too. Now, all that information is also available on manufacturer websites and from your color charts. But people have dumb.
Mike has got a fun question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You paint very carefully, but are there no oops moments?
Oh, sure. And you find ways to clean them up. I'm pretty careful. I don't have too many, but occasionally, you have things happen. Just the other day in that workshop, it's a small, thing that happened, but my paint wasn't completely dry when I took the masking off, and some of my white areas got paint, dark colors on them that I didn't want them to have. And so, I don't know if any of you have seen the watercolor ground.
Yeah.
So I was able to recapture my whites. I don't like using white paint, and I don't think the white paint matches like the paper, so it doesn't look as natural. So if you were like trying to put a highlight in white paint, it's not going to look as natural. So the watercolor ground actually matches the paper better. And so I went back in and used watercolor ground to recapture the white of the paper in an area. And you could get sparkle, that way too. Like, let's, say you didn't mask out an area you should have. You can go back with the watercolor ground and use it like you would a white paint, but I think it looks better. And there's different colors. There's natural whites, buff. They have gold and black too, which, that's if you're wanting to use like metallic paints or something like that. So anyway, there's a lot of different tips and tricks. And of course, there's magic erasers. But I try not to have too many terrible moments. Now, my friend, she was painting a painting and she was almost done, and she had spent a tremendous amount of time painting this beaded curtain that had a picture of Frida Kahlo on it. This beaded curtain. She had spent all this time, it was like a cafe scene. And she went to, there was a woman, you saw like the back of her, and she had a really neat like pattern shirt on. And she was going to paint the back pattern of the shirt, and she dropped a big blob of alizarin crimson on the woman's blouse that had to be, like bright white in the background. So she was able to use watercolor ground to recapture that. And I saw that painting. It was an exhibit, and I saw it and you couldn't tell. Oh, and I will show you when I was in England demoing. Let me show you in just a second. I'm trying to get all these little. When I was in England demoing, I had an hour to demo, and so I had it in stages. I showed you guys at the beginning that painting, and at the end, it's kind of like everybody's coming up and they're talking to you, and all these things are happening. And the organizer of the event, he's like, take the tape off of the thing. So I was trying, and I had traveled with that painting on my board, and I had really taped it down well, and it had traveled and been compressed. So that tape was really on there. I mean, it wasn't on there so much it was going to like damage the paper, but it was on there because I didn't want it to become loose. Well, he was in a hurry telling me to take it off. So I started to, and I ripped my painting. And I'll show you, I fixed it. Now, I wouldn't sell this painting, but I did want to see what I could do if I could fix it. And I did fix it with some watercolor ground.
Wrong place for creative cropping.
Yeah. Oh, it was completely the whole entire corner.
Boy.
Yeah. I mean, I learned my lesson. Just those are not the times to be doing, like when it's kind of like taking paper off of a watercolor block. You don't want to be rushed when you're trying to do something like that. All right, so I have most of my little sparkle, but I'll show you how I fixed it. And now I showed my friend when I was at Fabriano, I showed him what had happened, and he's like, if you mounted that on a board and varnished it, he's like, nobody would even ever know.
That was actually a question I had for you that at some point. Do you always put your paintings behind glass, or do you ever try the ceiling with
well, I just finished one that is going to a museum, or not a museum, a gallery show. So they had a 12x12 show, and you had to do it on a Raymar panel. All right, I'm going to move this and let it dry for a second, and then I'm going to show you a couple other things while we're letting that dry, and then I'll show you how I take the masking off and clean up in just a minute. And let me show you this one. So this is the painting that got ripped. This entire corner was ripped, and you can see it if I show you on the back.
Yeah.
But I repaired it with watercolor ground, And because it's so busy on the front, it's hard to find it
Yeah.
where it was. And it was very evident when it happened. So that is one thing. So I used a little bit of matte medium, the gel, and then the watercolor ground, and was able to repair it. But I mean, I have that now for demonstration purposes. Like I said, I wouldn't in good conscience feel like I could sell it. But my friend's like, hey, if you varnished it, whatever, nobody would ever be, it wouldn't be a big issue. But let me show you. So I've made my own panels before, but this is a Raymar panel. So it comes with the watercolor paper. I think it's Fabriano watercolor paper on it. And it's a metal, it's a panel with a piece of aluminum and then the paper glued on top of that. And so this is, it had to be 12 by 12 and it had to be on a Raymar panel for this gallery that I entered and I got in. So I got to mail it this week. But this one was been painted and varnished.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've done that a few times. Sometimes I'll make my own panels. But that's just to show you the Raymar panel.
Is that Raymar?
Yes, Raymar. And like I said, those are an aluminum, so they have, you can see on the back.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, RaymarArt.com, Raymar, watercolor archival. And so that's the aluminum panel with the watercolor on the top. So that's that.
Jean wants to know how do you display that? Do you then put it in a frame or?
Yeah, so here is, so I used to enter a 6 by 6 show that was by a gallery. So I'll show you. They have these little frames that you drop the paintings in. And so the way that he mounted them at the gallery was just with Velcro, double-sided Velcro. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. I bought the Velcro and I'm going to adhere it that way. And you just drop it right in there.
Cheaper than glass.
Well, and now I've got some exhibitions next year, 2 of them, and I've got to have 40 paintings, and that's expensive to ship. So I'm going to be doing this, less glass, less bulk, and more of this for that show, for those exhibits.
What did you use for varnish? Deb, has you seen both archival spray and cold wax used?
Yeah, so that one I used so Matthew Bird, there's a lot of people, Matthew Bird, who worked with Raymar for a while. He's got some really good tutorials on it, and Kathleen Giles did some. So I talked to both of them, and so that one's got it actually has, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's a watercolor protectant at first, so that you can actually, it stops everything. So if you had to take off the varnish, it protects the watercolor underneath it. And then it has matte varnish on top. And you can alternate matte and gloss varnish. And you want to do like 6 to 8 layers. So what I do is I take it outside and I do like a horizontal layer, and then I let that dry. Read what your container says and make sure it's archival. This last one, and Golden has varnishes. This last one I used Krylon. They had a watercolor one, and then the archival matte and gloss. So I wanted a matte finish at the end, so you can alternate matte and gloss. This time I just did matte, but you do that horizontally, let it completely dry, read what it says. I waited half an hour, and it depends on how wet, how humid things are, how cold. And then I did it vertically, let that layer dry. So I did that multiple times until you get it. Now Matthew Bird will then take a varnish on top, like the brush on varnish. But I have yet to do that because I like the way it looks that way. So I haven't done the actual brush on, and I have not done the cold wax yet, but I'm gonna experiment with that. Okay, I'm gonna do a little presentation and show you my okay, can everybody see? Can everybody see something that says setting up a still life?
I can.
Okay. I saw head nods. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a
And
little
two.
bit. Okay, good. Okay, so this is me outside. So I was telling you when I do still life outside, I do in the sun. So I've got my card table and I have my white mat board and I've got my object. I have a simple one in this case just to show you. And I like that because I kind of want to play around. The blue sky comes in there. I can't replicate the sun with lights like I can outside. So I wait for a nice sunny day. And I typically have a list of things that I want to I have a list of things that I want to do and photograph so that I'm not wasting a whole day. So here's just to show you, I've got a blurred background on this one. I've got a bird's eye view on this one. It's to show you I do all different angles, blurred, this, that, took the lid off. But, you know, here's one. I actually kind of like this one on the right. I might paint that one. It's got I like the blue shadows. I have taken it into my phone editing program and saturated colors a little bit. I kind of like that one, so it might become a painting. I like this one. See, I turned it around now and I have the black back from the back of my house is making kind of a black background. So I have a little more drama when I come the other direction. I do like to have these boards on the table, like mat boards. I have marble. I have a piece of marble, black, white, plexiglass, mirror that I can put sub objects on, and you can twist them in the sun so that you get all different shadows. So if I want a long shadow, now I typically do this in the morning and the afternoon. So in the noon time, like right as the sun's overhead, you're not going to get much of a shadow. You're kind of directly overhead. So I like longer shadows. So it's all on what you want. Summer sun is different to color than winter sun. When I lived in Japan, it looked a little different than when I lived in Texas, you know, so it's like where you live affects it too. So here's a setup I painted from this series just to show you. Here I've taken this citrus idea. I've got these blue in my bowls, glasses with water in them. So I'm like playing around with this idea. And then I'm kind of doing smaller groups of it, long shadows. This is one I actually painted. It was just in the national, well, a version of this was in the National Watercolor Society show. And so this is, again, I put water in the glasses, and then look at all those stripes are now like magnified and there's all these colors bouncing around. That is the kind of stuff that really excites me. Or when these oranges are inside the glasses and they're super elongated and strange, you know, strange looking, or you get little ones. So here is kind of that painting in progress. And I changed the background. I did a kind of a bokeh, like the out of focus little dots in the background, same colors that were back there, but I just abstracted it with the dots. And here's the final painting from one of those setups. Here's a holiday one with little glass Christmas trees that I set up outside. And they're iridescent, so they're doing these long shadows. Here's my inside, the lights. So I was telling you, there's my two cats that are assisting. You see them on the, one's on the table and one's up above. But so here I'm inside in my studio and I have a table and I've got the black mat boards and I have the lights all set up. I typically do this at nighttime and I'll turn all lights off except for those fairy lights. And here is the reference photo taken from today from one of those setups. So once I've taken that photograph, I've taken it into just my Apple editing program and then saturated it and cropped it the way I wanted it to get the colors that I wanted. Here's a thumbnail of some glass trees and a little jack-o'-lantern. I just did both of these in workshops just to show you, you know, like there's the multicolored lights I was talking about. And I've got that painting over here I can show you. So just these are fun, you know, ideas to do with those little lights. Here's some other ones that I took with metallic teapots and glass and the lights, and I'm just playing around and seeing what I like, and I saturate them and see what I can get out. Here's a step-by-step of one of those. So I have my masking like you saw here. I'm doing that same technique with the blurred background, except I'm even doing even more of it. So I demoed this in Fabriano in Texas. And so I've got the purples and the yellows and then this metallic teapot, and the whole background was blurred. There's gold teapots and things back there, and the foreground was in focus. And so there shows you a blurred background with the foreground in focus of that one. So that's just to show you a little bit of how I.
Deb had a question. I'm not sure what the question is, but what it means. She says, there are so many approaches to bokeh, B-O-K-E-H. Would you mind describing your approach?
Okay, so I've tried a few different ways, and I will show you. I have a painting here right now that I just finished.
What is bokeh? Is a photographic technique that refers to the aesthetic quality of out of focus areas. Blah, blah, blah. Not really sure what that is.
I have a couple of examples. Oh, let's see how far. So this one.
Wow, wow.
It's kind of that bokeh idea I did. It's the fairy light kind of in out of focus in the background, similar to the bokeh. This one I actually masked out some of the white dots back there. And then I went in and I take my scrubber brush. I have an old synthetic brush. It's like it's having a bad hair day, it's worn out. And this brush I use on every single painting, I think. And so what I do is once I take the masking off, and I'll show you on the painting I have, once I take the masking off, I then push in to out and blur that dot back there. Because you'll have, let me show you on this one. So this is a teapot that I demoed before, and I haven't added my finishing touches in on this one. So let me show you on this one. You take your brush and you go from in and you push out to blur. And I always have paper towel around so that I can clean up any pigment that I get on that white area. And this is what happened the other day. I did this and I got some color down in these white spots that I didn't like. And that's when I took the watercolor ground and put it back in. But this shows you, I do a lot of scrubbing and then taking the paper towel and pushing out. So that's one way with that. Now here is another one. Let me see if my face is big enough to show you. So this painting, my desk isn't big enough. This painting, let me take my camera off. Okay. This is one I just finished. And I have a totally different kind of bokeh in the background here. And this one, I literally did 1,001, I had all the blues I could find in varying shades. And I literally went circle by circle and just painted a mix between blues and greens to get the desired effect in the background. And there's not very much white back there like I had in the other one. So I didn't mask any of those out. It's almost like a quilt where you're putting one color next to the other, pixelated, like pointillism, with the big dots. So that's a whole nother technique that I did with this citrus painting.
I love that one.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. I showed you the one in the screen presentation of the citrus that I finished, and that's another one in that series. And then here's the little holiday one I just did. And I did all the different opaque colors. So I have spring green, I have scarlet, pyrrole scarlet, the bismuth vanadate, and horizon blue, which is Holbein. It's a Holbein color, but those are opaque colors, and I was able to get the multicolor same effect back there. And pumpkin I did for Halloween in a workshop. So
I don't know anybody who does stuff that looks like yours. Nobody.
well, thank you. think that's a good thing. So my other one's drying, but I'll show you on this one for our last couple minutes. And if you want, you can open it up to questions if you want. I don't think, as long as we don't have too much of an echo.
Yeah, people can unmute themselves and ask
But
questions.
I'll show you. This is the teacup that same one we just painted, but I've taken all of the masking off. And let me show you what the ground looks like. And get to it. Some people are probably like, I don't know what she's talking about.
I've painted ground out on a whole background at one point when it was what I had wanted to do just didn't work. So I redid the whole background.
Did you?
And it actually was fine. People couldn't tell it.
Yeah, and you can thin this out a little bit too, the watercolor ground. It looks like a paste. And so you do want to thin it out. My friend Helen that did the same, you probably did the same thing. She just built it up in thin layers.
Yep.
This is titanium white. Happens to be Daniel Smith brand because I work with them, but Golden has some, Kukasabe has some. There's a lot of different companies. This is buff titanium. And then if you're wanting to play around, they have a pearlescent white. If you want a little shimmer, and then they have like a gold and a black, and they have a transparent. And here's my black right there. So if you wanted to play around with like metallics or on the black, but you can paint any surface with the ground. Let's say you wanted to paint a lampshade. I mean, you could paint or a piece of wood. You can paint anything with the ground. I don't think it's exactly like watercolor paper. I feel like it's a little more, Carol, how did you feel? I felt it was a little more like aqua board, like a little more.
It was like almost like a really thin gesso that I was painting on, so that the quality of the painting in that area was different, but because it was all in the background, it was okay.
Right. I would use it conservatively and strategically. But I'm just going to do some finishing touches for the last couple minutes. And if you have questions, feel free. But this is where I've taken the masking off and I'm just going back in now. This one was done a little faster. I did this in about 45 minutes. So it's not quite as detailed as the one we did today, but this is where I just take my colors and go back over top and thin out the white areas. So if I were painting this for a show or something, I would spend another couple hours tweaking.
Yeah. Jean Gugino had to leave, but she said it's a great demo and she learned a lot.
Oh, good. And you can come in with opera pink too. This one has more opera pink in it. Opera pink. So on these wires, I'll come in with pinks and yellows and just tone down the wires with those colors. Now you want to be careful using the opaque when you're like doing touch up in the background, because the opaque paint leaves a little bit of a chalky residue. So I will typically switch to Twin Gold or something like that, which is a transparent color and it doesn't leave a little bit of that residue. And then you can also thin by just pulling the color around from around. If you just use water. You get the idea. But please check out my website, and I'm on social media. I'd love for you to find me on Facebook, Carrie Rhodes Waller or Carrie Waller Fine Art, and I'm on Instagram, Carrie Waller Art. And my website is Carrie Waller Fine Art. But I would love to connect. And I will have some sales and things for Black Friday on my website if you want to join my newsletter.
Carrie, if you could email me the finished painting, I'll use
Sure.
it at the beginning of, or as the, whatever they call it, that's on YouTube that you, when you,
Yes, I will send you the finished painting.
and
And
also
then this,
send it out to the members of the watercolor. It's really cool already, but the members of the Watercolor Society, with their link showing them how to get onto YouTube. It's cool.
okay. And this, I just wanted to show you, this is my rubber cement pickup. Not everybody knows about these. So I just want to make sure. This is what I use to take my masking off. It is completely dry inside this teacup. You can still see the shine on the outside. So I'm not ready to take it off there. But I just want to show you, this is what I use to take off my masking fluid. I don't suggest picking at it with your fingers or, once you get a ball of this going, you can use that, this too, but this is kind of like the sole of a shoe, Doc Martin shoe, but, you just want to be careful and make sure everything's dry. I would normally wait until everything was completely dry, but you start to see how the little sparkles that are left.
I just want to say that has been a most informative demonstration. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for having me.
We're very,
It's nice to meet you all. And I
Yeah.
hope you try out some of these techniques.
absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting, Carrie. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you. We're out of time. So thank you.
I am going to now stop the recording.
All right.